Welcome everyone to the first month of Learning History Through Literature for Homeschoolers. I'm so excited to have all of you with me this year, and I'm really looking forward to exploring all kinds of New Hampshire history with you through different types of books, poems, plays, and more. Each month, we'll all read a book at home before we meet at the Historical Society, and then we'll use that book to help us understand more about our state's awesome history. Plus, we'll talk about what we can learn about history in that book that would be really hard to learn someplace else, like in a textbook. Let's get started. This month's book is Abenaki Captive by Muriel L. Dubois, and it tells the story of a young settler in New Hampshire who gets captured by Abenaki Native Americans and taken up to Canada as a hostage. That young man would grow up to be a heroic general during the Revolutionary War, and one of the most famous men from New Hampshire. His name was John Stark. In a moment, I'll tell you a bit more about John Stark and his capture, but first I want to talk about a word. Genre. A genre is a category of art, in our case of writing, that has a special set of characteristics. You might already know some genres of literature, like science fiction, which usually deals with technology in the future, or romance, which requires two people to fall in love, or biography, which is the story of one extraordinary person. Each month, we'll be looking at a different genre and see how it helps us understand history better. Now, for our first month, our genre is one that you may not have heard of, and it's called fictionalization. This is where an author takes a true event and tells a story around that event that has made up or fictional parts. So something real happened, but in order to tell a good story, the author had to fill in the parts we don't know with new characters, events, and conversations. Sometimes an author might change some details to make a story more interesting, or to make a very specific point. For example, think of a holiday you celebrated with your family. If you were going to write a story about it, even if you remembered that holiday really, really well, you probably don't remember exactly what everyone said. So, in order to give people a really good understanding of your family, you'd have to make up what people said using all the knowledge you already have about your family members. In my case, if I was at a family holiday, my nephew would be there, and he loves Minecraft. So, he was probably talking about it at some point, so I might include that in my story. My cousin has a dog that she always brings with her, so I may write that she was holding the dog, whose name is Olive, during a conversation I have with her, even if I don't exactly remember that she was. And lastly, my younger brother is really quiet. So, I wouldn't have him say much in my story. I might just say that he nodded and smiled at what other people said. Sometimes, by making up this dialogue, it can give the reader an even better understanding of what each of the characters, in this case my family member, are like. That's what Muriel Dubois does for John Stark and the Abenaki in this book. In our case, the true event was the capture of John Stark. John Stark was born in Londonderry, New Hampshire, and he was about 23 years old in 1752 when he traveled to northern New Hampshire with his brother and two friends on a hunting and trapping expedition. The expedition had been a huge success, and they had collected over 560 animal pelts. While they were preparing to head home, they encountered a band of Abenaki Native Americans who had guns, and they were quickly surrounded. During the encounter, one of his friends was shot and killed. His brother escaped, but as you can see in this picture here on the left-hand side, John Stark and his friend were captured. Now, if you're wondering why the Abenaki would bother capture and take prisoners, it was because they could take these men and hold them for ransom. Basically, they would hold them prisoner and then sell them back to the English government. The Abenaki would make a profit, but the English government wouldn't pay if they killed them. So the Abenaki took the two men to their settlement, St. Francis, near Quebec, right there on the river where the arrow is pointing, where they stayed for about a year until the colony of Massachusetts Bay paid the ransom and brought the men back home. During this time, John Stark learned a lot about the Abenaki and their lives, and he left his time as a prisoner with a lot of respect for the Abenaki and their ways, more than most settlers had at the time. Some of the things that happened to him in the book, like running the gauntlet, which you'll read about and which is pictured here, really did happen. We know this because John Stark wrote about his experience in his memoir. But other things, like his fights with Augustin, an Abenaki hunter in the book, probably did not happen, at least the exact way the author wrote about it. In fact, almost all of the characters, except Stark and his friend, are made up. However, the author did lots of research into what Abenaki were like, how they lived, and how they interacted with the settlers. From that research, she was able to build a story around things that it was likely the Abenaki and John Stark said to and did with each other. Some of the characters are meant to represent a specific attitude or stereotype, so see if you can pick some of these out while you're reading. Also, the author is trying to give us a message about the relationships between the Native Americans and the colonists, and see if you can try and figure out what that message is. So as you go through this book, try and keep two big questions in mind about how we can use this book to understand history. First of all, does it matter if the details are real or made up, as long as they're based on research? And second, is knowing the facts the same thing as understanding history? We'll talk about both these questions and lots of other things when you come to discussion group, and I'm looking forward to doing some great activities with you. See you soon!